So I'm going to start. I struggled a lot about how to connect the recent events in Canada to what we're talking about today. So bear with me as I flail along here. So last Saturday, the Toronto Star carried a full-page ad with the headline, "Our appeal to Canadians: Stand with the Jewish community in the face of anti-Semitism." So this ad was signed by dozens of Jewish communal institutions, was basically a complaint that Canadians are being reluctant to stand in, quote, solidarity with their fellow citizens who are under attack. So it was disturbing that this ad contained a lot of undelineated but alarming allegations of recent anti-Semitic events. Some of these incidents are verifiably anti-Semitic, despicably, and, you know, verifiably anti-Semitic. Some have yet to be proven as anti-Semitic, and some have been completely debunked by eyewitnesses and video evidence. And what we were left with is a very disturbing lack of clarity, which is a point I'll come back to. So what's clear is this ad and its claims were bookended and eerily illuminated by two momentous examples of Canadian racism: the discovery of the bodies of 250 Indigenous children buried near a former residential school in Kamloops, BC, and the violent racist murder of 4 members of a Muslim family in London, Ontario. The rhetoric of the anti-Semitism ad and its proximity to these two highly consequential events demands that we think critically about how anti-Semitism is being portrayed at this historical moment. Is it ethical, I would ask, in light of these recent horrors visited on communities that continue to endure systemic racism, for the institutional Jewish community to demand a national summit on anti-Semitism? And how accurate are claims that Jews are the most targeted group in Canada? If we ask ourselves why anti-Semitism is being foregrounded at this moment, it's difficult not to see that attempts to pivot the public conversation away from Israel's most recent campaign of violence and destruction to an alarm-laden conversation about anti-Semitism constitute a strategy of obfuscation that has been in place since at least the 1970s, when the concept of the new anti-Semitism arose, linking criticism of Israel and anti-Jewish animus. So some of the groundwork, and I'm going to talk about work that I have been doing this year, some of the groundwork for the current panic over anti-Semitism has been laid by the ubiquitous B'nai B'rith yearly audit of anti-Semitic incidents, which is highly quoted. It is taken as truth by many levels of government, by the press, by many organizations. So early this year, I began to research the audit after I encountered what seemed like a very disturbing anomaly. I always find anomalies very useful for kicking off research. So in their 2019 report on anti-Semitism, the US Anti-Defamation League, which is no paradigm of equity, and I won't go into why that's true, reported a total of 2,107 incidents of anti-Semitism in the US, including 1,127 cases of harassment, 919 cases of vandalism, and 995 incidents of assault, including 5 deaths. And the ADL audit states explicitly that it excludes criticism of Israel and anti-Israel demonstrations, for example, from being counted as anti-Semitism unless there is evidence of anti-Semitic intent. And that's a really important distinction. So the ADL 2019 audit encompasses a US Jewish population of 6.97 million people. And the B'nai B'rith audit, which I want to highlight, on the other hand, reported 2,207 anti-Semitic incidents in Canada, with 83% occurring online, and every tweet counted as one incident. In other words, the B'nai B'rith audit claims that an equal number of anti-Semitic incidents took place in Canada that year, despite the fact that the US has a population 9 times that of Canada and has 17 times as many Jews. So are Canadian Jews 17 times more likely than their American counterparts to experience anti-Semitism? How could this possibly be the case? And the answer lies largely in the methodological differences between the two audits. So the B'nai B'rith audit states that to delineate the parameters of anti-Semitism and identify its root causes, B'nai B'rith uses the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. This, it can be argued, is the most significant underlying factor in this improbable disproportion between the ADL's numbers on anti-Semitism in the US and those reported by the B'nai B'rith in Canada. So while this IHRA WDA purports to be a tool for identifying and therefore reducing anti-Semitism, its focus on criticism of Israel appears to belie this intent. So the use of accusations of anti-Semitism as a strategy to suppress condemnation of Israel's apartheid regime has been promoted by the Israeli government for decades. Israeli Hasbara propaganda efforts intensified around 2007 in response to the founding of the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and similar international forms of dissent. Since then, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism discourse has morphed from a talking point to a campaign to influence policy decisions and legislation around the world. A series of conferences organized by the Israeli foreign minister as the Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism has been increasingly focused on influencing foreign governments to adopt and strengthen anti-discrimination laws and on educating officials about the connections between delegitimization of Israel and anti-Semitism. And we saw here in Ontario that the IHRA was adopted, circumventing the usual political procedures, and probably because of intense political pressure. In 2019, the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs and Public Diplomacy was given a $35 million budget to combat BDS worldwide. And promoting the IHRA, WDA, was a key component of this strategy, and one that has been very enthusiastically embraced by B'nai B'rith and other pro-Israel organizations here in Canada. So to put it simply, harsh criticism of Israel, including calling it an apartheid state, a claim recently substantiated by the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem and the internationally respected Human Rights Watch, is considered by B'nai B'rith and those who endorsed the IHRA to be anti-Semitic. So B'nai B'rith counts expressions that speak to the racism of the Israeli state, its apartheid nature, or to political speech that endorses equal rights for all those who live in Israel-Palestine among the 2,000 plus incidents of anti-Semitism in Canada. So it's important to note that despite claims to the contrary, there is no Jewish consensus on the IHRA, and that's something that they try and encourage us to believe. In fact, there is an ideological battle within the Jewish world over what is and what is not anti-Semitic. Over 300 of the world's most distinguished Jewish studies and Holocaust scholars declared recently in the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism that anti-Zionism, in both its historical and contemporary forms, can reflect an ethical opposition to the concept of the ethnocratic state, as well as a commitment to equal rights for all those who live in Israel-Palestine. Consequently, they claimed, strong criticism of Israel, including support for the nonviolent BDS movement, should not be a criterion for judging when an action or expression is anti-Semitic unless there is proof of underlying anti-Jewish animus. That harsh criticism of Israel is included in what counts as anti-Semitism is not the only reason to question B'nai B'rith's claim that Jews are the most targeted group in Canada. Academic studies and reports by advocacy groups confirm that racialized and Indigenous people report hate crimes and discrimination at much lower rates than do white people for a variety of reasons, including these communities' victimization at the hands of police. Jews, on the other hand, and I'm not saying that all Jews are white, there are Jews, who are racialized as well, on the other hand, tend to report discrimination at much higher rates than do other groups. There are likely three reasons for this. One, there are dedicated and easily accessible community-based mechanisms for reporting anti-Semitic incidents. Two, Jewish organizations like B'nai B'rith and CIJA actively educate, encourage, and solicit community members to report incidents. And three, most Jews do not experience the kinds of systemic discrimination at the hands of civil authorities that would discourage them from reporting anti-Semitic hate crimes. So all of this certainly calls into question any claim of Jews being the most targeted group in Canada. What also goes unacknowledged in B'nai B'rith's reporting is that the percentage of police-reported violent hate crimes targeting Jews is far fewer than for other groups. While 16% of hate crimes against Jews were deemed violent, 40% of hate crimes targeting Black people and 40% of those targeting Muslims were classified as violent. So, consistent and unimpeded reporting of hate crimes by racialized individuals and Indigenous people would likely increase hate crime statistics significantly. This would also give a more accurate picture of who is being targeted and the nature of such attacks. Moreover, state violence against racialized and indigenous people is never documented in police reported hate crime statistics and constitutes a hidden dimension of hate in this country. To be sure, this obsessive focus on anti-Israel incidents and their constitution as anti-Semitism deflects attention from the real threats to Jews in Canada, which, as in the US, appear to be emanating mostly from the white supremacist right. However, what is also disturbing is the divide that is created between Jews and other victims of racial hatred by what may be inaccurate claims to victimization. The B'nai B'rith audit portrays anti-Semitism as an exceptional and perhaps decisive form of hatred, thus unfailingly signaling a hierarchy of oppressions in which Jewish suffering trumps that of other groups. What is lost here is opportunity for solidarity across difference and transformative possibility of understanding how anti-Semitism and other forms of racism share some contemporary characteristics and historical origins, but also differ in their expression and impact. Jews and other marginalized groups need to consolidate our responses to racism, not fragment them. An honest accounting of anti-Semitism would be a good place to start.